Chapter 750. 5 Elements. When Thrall first saw this legendary enemy of the Beastmen, he thought that Duque was just smart. But when he saw that Duque could control 5 elements at the same time and appear in a form that didn't conflict with each other, Thrall was shocked. Thrall had heard of high-level human mages who could use Frostfire Arrow, which was a mixture of ice and fire elements, but he had never heard of anyone who could combine 5 elements without conflict. Arcane, fire, ice, lightning, and storm. The 5 destructive elements were perfectly combined, and it seemed like they couldn't go too far away from his body. From beginning to end, the 5-colored magic ball never left Duque's palm. Duque had no choice but to fight in close combat. He pushed out his palm and bombarded Arthas's arm at close range. Nobody noticed that as soon as it came into contact with Earthy's arm guard, the glowing orb suddenly morphed into the shape of a sword within 1/100th of a second. Then, in the blink of an eye, it sliced through Earthy's arm guard, the muscles of her arm, and the bones of her arm that had been imbued with the power of darkness. The others only saw that Arthas's ice armor, which was many times harder than a tortoise shell, was destroyed by the 5-colored energy ball after Grom blasted it in the chest area. It wasn't that Arthas's defense wasn't high, but that there was nothing in the world that could truly achieve full elemental defense. Just like Frostfire Arrow, it aimed to break through the opponent's weakest resistance. Duque's spell, which he named 5-colored Greatsword, was the same. To Duque's surprise, Arthas's weakest resistance was not fire, but everything didn't matter anymore because Orgrim had already come up to finish off the attack. Oh, the hammer. Orgrim definitely wouldn't mind smashing Duque and Arthas into meat paste together. Of course, the premise was that the Duque who used the 5-colored greatsword to cut off Arthas's arm was the real deal. Just before the hammer of destruction landed, the Duque in front of Arthas disappeared. Orgrim noticed that when Duque appeared with the colorful ball in his hand, all the other doppelgangers of Duque had disappeared. The only remaining Duque was hiding behind a Bendis, who was holding a shield and a one-handed sword. Disque. Should I say as expected of Duke Marcus? No matter what, he was so shrewd that it was frightening. Arthas, who had lost his arm, naturally lost his last chance to retaliate. Without any hesitation, Orgrim's hammer descended from the sky with unparalleled might. Boom. The earth shook violently. When the hammer landed on the undead knight's chest, the ground around the two of them bulged due to the huge impact. Everything within 100 meters was engulfed in flames. The power of Orgrim's attack was beyond the imagination of mortals. Thrall's vision was blinded and dazzled. He could not help but turn around and fall to the ground. Thrall calmly realized that Orgrim had succeeded in his attack. After a full 5 to 6 seconds, Thrall carefully opened his eyes and saw the tragic scene on the battlefield. Due to the full power of the Hammer of Destruction, the ground was instantly burned to ashes. Before, the elf prince only burned the corpses, but now, everything was burned. The grass, the short trees, the messy rocks, and even the small forest in the distance were blown away in an instant. Giant concentric circles appeared on the grassland with the two of them as the center. The sand had reached its melting point, and it gave off a horrible smell. The smell was very pungent, and there was even a glass-like molten substance around them. The chaotic flames disappeared, and everyone looked at the center again. Orgrim held the Hammer of Destruction in his left hand, and his right hand grabbed the undead knight's neck. Then he lifted the undead knight's broken body up high. Arthas was in a terrible state. There was a huge burnt hole where his heart should be, and the scenery behind his chest could be seen. His armor had not completely shattered, and his remaining ribs were supporting his human form. The once noble and holy Lordaeron prince was about to end his sins in his first official battle after his fall. He closed his eyes and lowered his head. On his right was his broken arm, swaying in the wind. It should be over. Seeing this scene, almost everyone secretly heaved a sigh of relief. "Ha! You can't play anymore, you filthy undead knight." Grom laughed as he walked over with his legendary axe, Bloodhowl. "Chop off his head and give the body to a human holy knight. Humans are better at purifying undead than us." Orgrim ordered as he turned to look at Duque. Duque smiled and nodded. Originally, they wanted to personally chop off the head of Arthas, who killed his father and destroyed his kingdom. Since Duque had no objections, Mograine and Grom could only accept it. Fortunately, they could still purify Arthas's evil and stinky soul. Hearing the soul of a fallen holy knight like them wail in agony would definitely feel good. On the other side, Grom grinned as he raised his axe. His hard fangs seemed especially domineering at this moment. "I'd be happy to," halfway through his sentence, Grum suddenly realized that something was wrong. That was because Orgrim was asleep. Sleep in the middle of this noisy battlefield? Falling asleep before dealing the final blow to the enemy? What the hell? Sleep? Duque shuddered. He immediately realized what was going on and shouted at the top of his lungs, "Be careful of the Dreadlord." The Dreadlord was a highly intelligent monster that exuded powerful demonic energy. It was an unbelievably terrifying existence, the ruler of darkness and the mind. These cruel and evil creatures were the Burning Legion's most capable generals. Any Dreadlord was at least as powerful as a peak Radiant Moon Mage. As if to prove Duque's words, in the next second, everyone present was attacked by a fog that contained evil energy. It was a thick, purplish-black fog. When the scorched ground touched it, a sizzling sound could be heard. It was highly corrosive. Without the help of the Holy Knights, the Beastman heroes would probably die. Although the fog wasn't fatal, everyone was unavoidably disturbed. Fog of decay? Just as time seemed to freeze, a shocking change occurred that no one could have imagined. Arthas's severed arm actually floated into the air and pierced through the chest of the former great chieftain Orgrim. That was an unsurprising stab to the chest. The sharpness of a god-tier magic weapon wasn't something that a well-trained body could withstand. It was easy to imagine that Orgrim's heart would be split in half at this moment. Chapter 751. Duque said calmly, "You played a part in the birth of the Death Knights." Duque spoke again, "You want to go to the Kalimdor continent, right?" "No," Sar and Rexer screamed at the same time. Orgrim lifted the heavy hammer of destruction, with difficulty, and handed it to Sar. "This hammer of mine has accompanied me for my entire life. Now it's yours. From today onwards you are the fourth chief of the Horde." After a while, Orgrim seemed to have affected his wounds and spat out a mouthful of blood. Then he said, "Are we still going to fight?" The Alliance soldiers lined up neatly and slowly retreated step by step, creating a clear dividing line in front of the chaotic horde. Sar hesitated, but Orgrim nodded. "That's right." Duque did not speak and let Orgrim laugh. The noise of battle in the distance became softer. It was obvious that the Alliance and the Horde had joined forces and the undead had lost their commander. Suddenly, a horn sounded from the main battlefield. Even though Duque knew that the Scourge army did not have a direct relationship with the Burning Legion's Dreadlord, Duque did not dare to take the risk. Kill, that was the same. He also threw a huge fireball the size of a carriage at the Dreadlord's head. Duque and Kale, that's flashed, trying to get past these annoying high-level undead. Even if they chased, they might not be able to catch up. With Kuel Salas still around, this was likely to be a serious diplomatic problem. Then the atmosphere was a sad parting of life and death. Everyone saw a mocking smile on his face. On many battlefronts, after the undead were wiped out, both sides fell into an awkward standoff. Fortunately, whether it was the Horde Centurions, Kiliarchs, or the Alliance's lieutenants, they restrained their soldiers. They had no choice but to retreat. No one knew what the Scourge army had up their sleeves. "Yes." Sar gritted his teeth and nodded. "Ah." Grom immediately roared, slashing down with all his might with Blood Howl, that he had just raised. There was still the possibility of losing Kale, that's 18 undead knights and 18 liches arrived beside the Dreadlord in an instant. These high-level undead swarmed forward, blocking everyone's path of pursuit. If they wanted to continue the chase, they would have to abandon Kale, that's and let this noble prince block the two Dreadlords while Duque chased after them. Damn it. Duque raised his hand and conjured a bunch of Hand of Magic, instantly casting spells that rained down like a downpour. Even if they caught up to him, they might not be able to defeat him. Orgrim squinted at Duque, who was standing 2 meters away from him, then glanced at the Alliance and the Horde. He opened his mouth weakly and spoke in the common language. "This is bad. I've been fighting with you for so many years. I've thought about it many times. Either I'll kill you or I'll be killed by you. But I never thought that we would work together at the end of our lives, and then I'll be killed by that monster. Ahem." Duque waved his hand without turning back. "Farewell, Orgrim." Sar supported Orgrim's body, but he could not stop the frosty blood from spurting out of the wound on Orgrim's chest. When Duque and Kai Z returned to the main battlefield, more than half of the 36 cannon fodder summoned by the Dreadlord were dead. These mid-level undead knights and liches were not a match for the heroes. Without much thought, Duque and Kai Z worked together to clear out the rest. Dark summoning. Sar still could not believe his eyes when he saw Duque leading his army away. Even when the Alliance's army retreated in an orderly manner under the sound of the horn, Orgrim could not believe his eyes. Duque was referring to 1 year at the Dark Portal. In order to make up for the lack of Horde warriors, Orgrim agreed to Ghoul Dan's request to insert the corpses of human knights into the souls of Horde warlocks to make them undead knights. The only fortunate thing was that Orgrim's soul wasn't sucked into Frostmourne with the help of 2 paladins. After all, Arthas didn't have the time to inject enough dark power into the Frostmourne. Usually, at a distance where they could see each other's fangs or eyes clearly, the 2 sides would have already started fighting. Today was a little special. The lieutenants immediately understood. All troops retreat 30 meters. Duque shook his head. Maybe we will fight again in the future, but not now. But not now. We have a more terrifying common enemy, the Scourge army. Duque clenched his teeth. Retreat. Eee. One was red and the other was blue. The goat horns on the foreheads of the 2 dreadlords trembled, and they let out sinister chuckles at the same time. Orgrim pointed in the direction where Duque had left. See that, Sar? That is the bearing of a legendary hero of the Alliance. Firm, far-sighted, and able to distinguish between priorities. You still have a lot to learn. But I believe in you. Your achievements in the future will definitely not be inferior to Duke Marcus. Kale, that's heaved a sigh of relief when Duque gave the order to retreat. At this moment, Sar's face was covered in tears as he nodded heavily again. Orgrim laughed, his laughter filled with desolation and unfulfilled wishes. Goodbye, my good opponent. Kale, that was not confident in facing an unknown opponent of this level. He had thought that Duque would chase him to the end, but he had never seen Duque be so rational. It was the Dreadlord that Antonidas had chased away, a different Dreadlord with a completely different color. Mograine had tried to use Holy Light to save this temporary teammate, but it was completely ineffective. If wounds caused by the demon god level, Frostmourne, could be healed so easily, it would not be Frostmourne. Orgrim probably wouldn't be able to survive. Go to the South Stream coast. I will allocate some ships for you. The quality won't be good, but it should be enough for you to reach the other side of the sea. The Alliance will not attack you along the way. But for those who have not joined the Alliance, you will have to think of a way yourself. With that, Duque left without looking back. Orgrim admitted frankly, that's right. Speaking of which, this is also my sin. The person who created the Death Knight died in the hands of the Death Knight. Irony. How ironic. Although they did not want to admit it, the leaders of the 3 tribes, including Sar, could only nod. This terrifying undead army was definitely the enemy of the living. Unfortunately, this powerful strike missed. A purple figure as fast as the wind grabbed Arthas and Frostmourne, which was still attached to the severed hand. The price of doing so was too high. On the other side, Orgrim was already in a dying state. Grom and Rexer stood behind the 2 chiefs, holding their weapons tightly. Even if the situation was unfavorable, as long as Orgrim spoke or the Alliance made any moves, they would not hesitate to fight. But they immediately realized that there were 2 dreadlords blocking in front of them. Chapter 752. When the Alliance and the Horde broke off contact and the Horde's army retreated to the west, the 80,000 Scarlet Cross soldiers set up camp next to the Dalajan. A large group of lieutenants and colonels surrounded the main tent. What are you doing? Are you trying to rebel? Mograine was a little angry. These were his soldiers. When they were almost attacked by the Scourge and the Horde, they were all obedient. Now they were rebelling against Duque? Wasn't this a slap to his face? No. Marshal Mograine, we just want to know an answer from Commander-in-Chief Marcus. Regardless of whether the answer is in line with our wishes, we are still the soldiers of Rotterdam in the Alliance. A brigadier general, who was obviously elected, saluted impeccably, then asked the question on everyone's mind, why did you let the Horde go? Duque's eyes were like lightning. He looked from left to right, then raised his chin slightly. Before I answer your question, let me ask you a question. Do I, Duke Marcus, look like a traitor of the Horde? Everyone was stunned, then looked a little embarrassed. If Duke, who had personally ended the 2 wars between the Alliance and the Horde, and had killed millions of beastmen and was crowned as the Alliance's great hero, was a spy for the beastmen, then the humans might as well jump into the sea and commit suicide. How is that possible? You are a great hero of the human race. Sir, please don't joke. We don't mean to reprimand you, but we can't sleep until we get an answer. That's right. Most of our homelands were burned by the orcs. Many of our elders died in the hands of the orcs. Suddenly telling us not to attack the rebellious orcs makes us feel uncomfortable. Mograine could completely understand how they felt. Former enemies and yesterday's slaves had suddenly become potential allies. No one could stand this. But what if they angered Duque and caused Duque to abandon Lordaeron in a fit of rage? Mograine and Abendis were both furious. Duque waved his hand to stop Mograine and Abendis, who were about to explode, and said with a smile, "So, what do you think we should do?" Someone shouted on the spot, "Destroy the Doomsday Army first, then hang those orcs who dared to kill the prison guards." Duque continued to ask, "Okay, next question. Do any of you know how many soldiers the Calamity Troop has?" 1 million? This was a conservative. Don't even mention a million. As long as we have a complete formation and FFF flamethrowers, we won't be afraid even if they come at us with 10 million. This was obviously an optimist. At this time, Duque's face suddenly turned cold as if by magic. His expression was frighteningly gloomy. Duque raised a finger. Not to mention that you only have 100 flamethrowers per 10,000 people. Even if you had 10,000 sets, it would be useless. Do you know how many soldiers the Doomsday Army has? 100 million. At least 100 million. As soon as Duque's words left his mouth, it was as if an icy gust of wind had suddenly swept through the entire place. All the colonels and lieutenants shivered at the same time, and then gasped in unison. It can't be? How is this possible? Duque raised his chin slightly. That's right. There are only slightly more than 10 million humans in the entire Eastern Kingdom. But don't forget, to create the Undead Clan, we don't need to make zombies out of living humans. To the Doomsday Army, the skeleton soldiers are also soldiers. Duque did not beat around the bush and directly gave the answer. When the colonels and lieutenants heard this, it was as if they had been struck by lightning. They all stood rooted to the ground and were speechless for a long time. Duque waved his hand and said loudly, "I know that it is hard for you to accept, but the Doomsday Army is such a bastard. They will dig out all of your ancestors from their resting places and turn them into soldiers who will slaughter the living. Therefore, what we are going to face is not just 1 or 2 million trash targets, but hundreds of millions of skeleton soldiers. If you don't want to be drowned by the sea of undead and become a part of purgatory, then go down and prepare for battle." The officers dispersed and hurriedly returned to their own platoons and squads to announce this terrifying fact to the soldiers. For a moment, the barracks was filled with screams and curses. Mograine was a little embarrassed. "Duque, thank you for your hard work." No. They have to think this through sooner or later. Otherwise, there will always be a thorn in their hearts. Abendis's facial muscles twitched. Will there really be 100 million skeleton soldiers? Duque raised his head and looked towards the north. That is an exaggeration. Arthas does not have that many liches and cursing disciples who can control the skeleton soldiers. 10 million undead clan soldiers is the limit. But there will definitely be 100 million undead clan soldiers unless we... Duque did not continue. That, unless, was a very cruel thing to the people of Lordaeron. Because it meant that the people in every town would have to dig out the skeletons of their ancestors and burn them. Even if the people of Lordaeron agreed to do this, it was almost impossible. The people of Lordaeron had lived on this land for 2,800 years. Before Arthas killed his father, Lordaeron had a population of about 6 million. It was impossible to calculate how many generations had passed in 2,800 years and how many people had died. Even if they wanted to burn them, they could not do it with their current manpower and resources. Back in the tent, Mograine asked anxiously, "What do we do now?" Duque gestured on the military map, constantly moving the chess pieces that represented the strength of the towns. "It is a good thing that we defeated Arthas' main force, but don't forget that the Scourge army is more powerful than the Locusts. We need to quickly contact all the towns of Lordaeron and gather all our forces. Those who should retreat, retreat, and those who should defend. We cannot let the Scourge army expand endlessly." Seeing the direction in which Duque was moving the chess pieces, Mograine and Abendis almost broke down. If someone else had done this, they would probably have cursed out loud. This was because Duque had completely vacated Lordaeron and withdrawn all the troops in the Tirisful woodlands and Silverpine forest to the North Stream coast. In the east, he directly abandoned the holy city of Stratholme and withdrew all the troops to the Light's Hope Chapel and Tyr's Hand in the east. Nearly 2,000 kilometers of land in the east and west were all given to the Scourge army in one go. Mograine's eyelids twitched. "We can't use the Soterer River as a line of defense," Duque interrupted him. "If Caer Daren is not the nest of the Church of the Damned," the faces of the generals in the tent turned pale again. There were a few generals who wanted to argue, but Duque took out his trump card, Queen Kalia's staff. "In the name of the commander of the Alliance and Queen Liamenethil, I demand that you carry out this order. Those who refuse will be punished as deserters." Chapter 753. It was difficult to leave one's homeland. This was an emotional bond that humans had in any era and world. The land gave birth to life, and the land gave birth to emotions. Duque understood the feelings of the soldiers of Lordaeron. Unfortunately, as a commander and a traveler who knew the course of history, he knew what he had to do. He could not stop the tragedy that had already happened. He could only let it spread and expand. That night he received some bad news. As expected, the Doomsday Army's attack was not limited to just one direction. The Church of the Damned had infiltrated Lordaeron very deeply. The latest report was that in the Tirisful woodland, more than 10 cities had been poisoned by the lords of the Church of the Damned. They either poisoned the wells or the granaries, causing tens of thousands of people to die and turn into zombies. Coupled with the Doomsday Army that had set off from Lordaeron, more than half of the Tirisful woodland had fallen. However, there was good news too. The emergency evacuation drill that Duque had stopped back then had played an unexpected role. Duque's butler, Makarov, had successfully used the water transportation of Lordaeron Mill Lake to save nearly 100,000 citizens. He had even used the fleet behind him as bait, luring Arthas into thinking that all the refugees had fled south to the Dalagen. In fact, most of the refugees had circled around Fenris Island in the middle of Lordaeron Mill Lake before heading west into the Silverpine Forest. They had now arrived at the North Stream coast to await rescue. This could be explained by Antonidas's dark expression. The old man was certain that Duque's subordinates had tricked the Dalagen. Otherwise, Arthas's undead army would not have targeted the Dalagen first. The old man did not catch up with the Dreadlord. As soon as he returned, he announced that the Dalagen would focus on clearing out the undead in their territory. He did not even want to see Duque. However, at the very least he promised to give 2 mages to Kale, that's to lead the Scarlet Cross Legion led by Duque. Including the Dalaran infantry regiment that was protecting the mages, Duque now had 100,000 soldiers in his hands. Duque was very displeased that Antonidas refused to see him. However, he could only helplessly accept this fact. In history, Antonidas also became more and more stubborn as he grew older. In his later years he was just like Tyrrhenus, each of them worse than the other. Kale, that was quite excited about the opportunity to lead troops in a foreign country. Duque, this time please give me some pointers. I will cooperate fully with you. Duque nodded and accepted Kai Z as his little brother. In the end, Duque chose to follow the Beastman's footsteps. However, his target wasn't the South Flow Coast but the North Flow Coast. Firstly, there were more than 300,000 refugees gathered there, but there weren't many soldiers to protect them. Secondly, Duque did not dare to go to Stratholme through the Alterac Mountains. In the steep terrain of the Alterac Mountains, the most commonly used battle formations were useless. In such narrow and steep terrain, there was no need for an army of 10 million undead. 500,000 skeletons could jump down from the top of the mountain and carry the soldiers down the cliff. No matter how many elites the humans had, it was useless. Humans were not undead and even the most elite soldiers would be tired. That night, Duque had to let the soldiers have a good rest. Throughout the night, Duque had to run to the South Sea city-state. The sky near the Dalagen had been shrouded by the canopy of undead, and communication had become very bad. Only in the South Sea city-state could Duque use magic to communicate with other countries. At the same time, Arthas was not having a good time. He found that his soul seemed to have fallen into a state of confusion. When he came back to his senses, he suddenly found that he had returned to the place where he had led the million undead army, the outskirts of Lordaeron. He finally recognized the guy who had saved his life. The Dreadlord, Tichondrius, looked almost identical to Mal Gannis. They were both sharp and vicious, but he also had nothing good to say about Arthas. Arthas subconsciously raised his broken right hand that was tightly holding Frostmourne with his left hand. "Yo, I'm not your enemy," Tichondrius said. Tichondrius said, twisting his lips into a smile that looked more like sarcasm. "But don't expect me to comfort you. Although you killed your biological father and handed the kingdom to the Scourge army, you passed the first test. The Lich King is initially satisfied with you. But you, look at what you have done." Arthas was silent. "You actually retained so many human emotions, causing you to be completely unable to use the power of Frostmourne. Ugly. Too ugly." Arthas felt 2 completely different emotions attacking him at the same time, shame and anger. "Yes," he replied, trying to maintain a calm and powerful voice in front of the great demon. "I was wrong. I haven't completely forgotten the people and things I used to love. I feel regret for my failure, and I feel ashamed for losing to Duke Marcus." "Very good." The Dreadlord sneered. He was satisfied with Arthas's honesty. Next time I will definitely kill Duque. I will imprison his soul in Frostmourne. I will let him suffer eternal torture. I will also kill Jaina and turn her into a banshee. But at this moment, another voice came from the depths of his heart, not from Frostmourne. You're lying. You can't even harden your heart to kill Jaina. For some reason he suddenly felt very envious and jealous of Duque, who completely owned Jaina even when he was missing. He knew that a real Death Knight should not have emotions. But he just could not control himself. He suppressed his emotions. Yes. The voice in his heart would eventually disappear. He could not bear the growth of the warmth when he thought of Jaina. If he let it develop, it would spread like gangrene and swallow him up. The Dreadlord pretended not to see the emotional struggle in his heart. Instead he laughed and said, "There's no need to be so anxious. Perhaps Duke Marcus will become your right-hand man, as a lich. However, the Lich King can't bear to see your miserable state anymore. Now I'll give you a chance to become stronger and bear more of Frostmourne's power." Say it. I'll do it, Arthas said without hesitation. Right now, there's a group of uninvited guests trying to break into the throne hall that belongs to you and steal your father's remains. Go and destroy them. As long as you succeed, you will have greater power. With that, the Dreadlord touched Frostmourne. Arthas was shocked to find that the power from the demon sword was rapidly repairing his broken body. Chapter 754. Lordaeron, which used to be beautiful and holy, was now dead silent. Traces of the horrifying massacre from a few days ago were still all over the city. Half of the pure white tower had collapsed, the once magnificent streets were filled with rubble, and the walls were covered in scratches. Dark blood splattered on the walls and the streets, as well as a few smelly pieces of flesh. Most of the undead had been transferred to Dalagen a few days ago to participate in the war that attempted to destroy the city of mages. Only a few undead with incomplete bones crawled around the city in confusion. The sound of galloping could be heard, and a warhorse that was emitting a holy radiance stepped on a zombie that only had half of its body left. Even its intestines were hanging outside, giving this sorrowful undead its final rest. On the wide streets of Lordaeron, 8 knights were leading the way. In the middle there were 4 large carriages and several guards. Another 8 knights followed closely behind. It was obvious that this was a funeral procession that did not fit in with the deathly silent city of terror, as the carriages were carrying funeral ornaments. It was a very grand decoration. Perhaps it was done in a hurry, and the ornaments did not match, but it was obvious that it was for a high official. Stop. This is the territory of the great king of the dead, Arthas Menethil. Ah. A low-level lich gathered over 100 skeleton soldiers and zombies, but they were instantly defeated by the charging paladins who were emitting a golden radiance. The fragile skeleton soldiers were directly smashed into meaningless pieces when they were touched by the heavy armored warhorses that were galloping at high speed. On the other hand, the lich was struck in the chest by the leading knight with a downward swing as though he was hitting a polo ball. The lich's magic was completely useless. His shadow arrow was directly nullified by the pure golden light of the leading paladin, and its soul was instantly evaporated. Without the obstruction of high-level undead, the team of paladins mysteriously killed their way in from the east gate. They broke through several squads of low-level lich troops, and rushed straight into the collapsed palace. They arrived outside the empty throne room. The 12 paladins spread out on their warhorses and cleared the undead in the surroundings. 8 paladins wearing silver armor jumped down and lined up in 2 columns. They used their strong arms to carry a huge coffin. The dim light shone softly on the coffin, and one could clearly see the Menethil royal family emblem carved in gold on the coffin. They were the uninvited guests that Tichondrius spoke of. Arthas suddenly understood why the Dreadlord was so excited. Standing at the door leading from the throne hall to the side hall, Arthas could clearly see that the leading holy knight's posture was different from the others. His golden wing pauldrons were also unique. Arthas's hands suddenly trembled, and she could only grip Frostmourne with greater strength. He suppressed all the hesitation and apprehension in his heart and ordered his subordinates to take action. Almost at the same time, the corpse that had been lying dead in the throne room moved. It wasn't the wobbling and unsteady movements of low-level undead. Instead, it was more like a fierce tiger bending down before it hunted its prey. A low-ranked lich stood outside every broken window, raising a staff that emitted an ominous light and pointing it at the holy knights. The cave demons burrowed out of the soil on the lawn of the palace, their sharp mouths trembling. The team that ventured into the throne room was almost entirely made up of outstanding holy knights, but there weren't many of them. Arthes's undead troops, who had been lying in ambush, easily surrounded them. The Holy Knights put down the coffin and pulled out their weapons, but they didn't attack immediately. Instead, they stood in a circle and glanced at the tall and white-haired man beside the coffin, waiting for his orders. Whether, it couldn't be anyone else. He looked expressionlessly at his former student who walked in from the side hall, but there were clearly more wrinkles on his face than Arthes remembered. Staring at Arthes, who stood in front of him, Whether looked very calm, but his eyes were burning with the flames of justice. Whether pointed to the rotting corpse that was lying limp on the throne with a big hole in its chest and said, "I'm here to give your father his final rest." Arthes raised his runic magic sword. As long as his soul is still in the sword, he can never rest in peace. Whether's facial muscles twitched because of the pain, and his voice suddenly rose, like a whip tearing through the air. "You'd better get out of the way immediately. Otherwise, I can't guarantee that I won't do anything to you during your father's funeral." It was Arthes's turn to twitch, and he replied in a rough voice, "Fate has made us so. By the way, I've already disbanded your knights. What right do you have to stand here?" "Ah." Whether laughed. Although his laughter was bitter, it was not faked. "Do you really think that you can disband the Silver Hand with just power? Why am I standing here? Because of my pledge of loyalty to Terina's Menethil, because I'm a holy knight." "Oh, I forgot, you're a holy knight too, I mean in the past." Holy knight. A once familiar word that had become extremely distant. Arthes did not forget it. His heart was tossing and turning in his chest, and for a moment he lowered his sword. But then he heard the whisper again, reminding him how much power he had now, emphasizing that the path of the holy light could not bring him what he desired. Arthes once again gripped Frostmourne tightly. Changing from a holy knight to a death knight is very dramatic, isn't it? Whether. Although this process was enjoyable, I don't have time to reminisce. All of you must die. At this moment, Wether's face finally showed extreme anger. He stared at Arthes with a burning gaze that seemed to be able to destroy everything, and was extremely shocked. "Holy light above, if you want to fight, I can fight for you. But can't you wait until we collect your father's remains?" Arthes. "His kingdom has already been destroyed by you, why do you have to blaspheme him again? You are the most despicable fallen person in the world." "Father." Arthes turned around and glanced at his father's eyes, which were still open and had not started to rot. The eyes that had not died in peace seemed to still be staring at him. A tremor spread through Arthes's body. "Blaspheme? Depraved?" He murmured, more to himself than to answer. It seemed that this was another reason why the Dreadlord had laughed sinisterly when he announced the order. He knew very well who was coming. This was obviously another test from the Lich King. He wanted to see if Arthes could fight against his master, and if he could further blaspheme his father's remains. Arthes had enough. He raised Frostmourne high and shook his head. "No, we fight now." "Why?" Wether's eyes widened in anger. "For greater power." Chapter 755. "You despicable degenerate." Uther's roar echoed in the broken throne room. Beside him, the battle between light and darkness had begun. The golden holy light of the holy knights. The dark evil light of the death knights. They were shining together. Every second there were people falling. Or the human knight who had just shouted his holy name. Or perhaps it was the former royal guard who silently fell once more, the current death knight. Despicable? Degenerate? Ah. What does the world think have to do with me? I just want to feel good. I just want power. Ah. Amidst Arthas' wild laughter, Frostmourne began to scream evilly. Not only in his hands but also in his mind, thirsting for battle. Arthas gripped the hilt of the sword tightly with both hands. His feet went into the T-stance that Uther had taught him. He raised his sword and got into an attacking stance. For an instant, Wether's gaze seemed to have traversed through time. He had arrived at the Arthas of 13 years ago, the little Prince Arthas who had worshipped him as a disciple and studied the path of battle and the path of holy light with unparalleled passion. Uther withdrew his gaze from his memories and looked at Arthas for a while. Finally he slowly raised the blazing holy light warhammer. "I was never willing to believe the news that you had degenerated into a death knight and killed your father." The holy knight leader's voice was hoarse, and there were actually tears in his eyes. "Until I saw the destruction of Lordaeron with my own eyes, and saw the remains of his majesty." At this moment, Arthas felt his father's eyes focus on him from behind. He felt that Uther's words made his soul tremble. He hated this feeling of weakness. He purposely let the dark light on his body shine brighter. He turned his head and glanced at his father's corpse, the corner of his mouth rising. Do you believe it now? Unexpectedly, Uther started talking to himself. Your selfishness when you were young, I thought it was childishness. Your stubbornness and blindness, I thought it was the desire of a young man to walk out of the shadow of his father's generation. At the mention of the orphanage, both master and disciple had the same sadness on their faces. Uther raised his head. Yes, the holy light forgave my heart. Even though it was a true tragedy. After that day, I always prayed that you would realize your mistake. A mistake? Yes. I was making mistakes again and again, but why didn't you stop me at that time? After pushing the blame onto her master, Arthas continued to glare angrily at Uther. Wuther's mouth was full of bitterness. I cannot be enemies with the son of my lord. Arthas forced a smile onto her face, and the two of them began to stare at each other. But you've done it now. This is my last promise to your father, my late friend. Even though I killed his own son when he was defenseless, the least I can do is make sure his remains are treated with respect. You and your people will die because of your promise. Arthas looked mockingly at the holy knights who were dwindling. Holy knights were very strong, but in the face of endless enemies, this strength, this holy light, was as weak as a firefly in the night. Perhaps. Before coming here we were all mentally prepared for this. Wuther did not care. I would rather die for my oath than live under your mercy. I'm so glad that Tyrrhenus is dead. I am so glad that he doesn't have to see what you have become. These words made Arthas' heart ache. He did not expect this kind of reaction. The prince was stunned and his heart was in a fierce battle. And Wuther, who already had the advantage, took advantage of the moment of hesitation to strike first. For the holy light. Wuther roared, swinging his warhammer slightly backwards, and then swung it at Arthas with all his strength. The blazing giant warhammer came at such a fast speed, and the howling of the wind made people feel like the warhammer of holy light had already torn through space. It was a hammer strike that resembled the descent of the scorching sun. There was no time to dodge, and Arthas had to grit his teeth and raise his sword to block. Clang! There was a loud sound. The huge impact almost made Arthas collapse. Arthas was at a great disadvantage. Almost at the moment when the sword and hammer clashed, Arthas felt the strength in his arms and abdomen weaken. The body that was reborn with the power of darkness was still not comparable to the body that had accompanied him for more than 20 years. The aftereffects of losing his arm and abdomen in the battle with Duque finally showed itself. Because Frostmourne had expended a huge amount of magic power to heal him, coupled with the instability of Arthas' Heart of Darkness, the direct result was that the dignified magic sword, Frostmourne, was actually smashed by the most powerful paladin Uther's epic-grade mortal iron sledgehammer, leaving a small crack. No, Arthas showed a panicked expression. Destroy, Arthas. Wuther let out a thunderous roar, and his beard fluttered in the wind, making him look like a god that had descended to the mortal world. Arthas did not dare to take the second blow no matter what. The nimble footwork that he had trained for a long time saved him. Even though he was almost hit, he barely dodged. The undead king could feel the air flow from the warhammer hitting his face. Wuther's expression was calm and focused, and there was a murderous aura. At this moment he only had one thought, to destroy the king's unfilial son. Stopping the spread of evil was his duty. At the same time, Arthas also knew that there was no turning back. He was no longer a living person. After crossing the taboo of life and death, he could only walk further and further down the path of depravity. Even without the Dreadlord's reminder, he knew that killing his former mentor was his duty. He had to erase his past, all of it. Otherwise, it would never stop raising its head, bringing him false sweet hope, as if there was still a possibility that he could receive mercy and forgiveness. Wuther continued to attack, and after a total of 12 blows, Arthas retreated a total of 24 steps, all the way to the edge of the throne. Suddenly, Arthas found that his back foot was pressed against the edge of the Lordaeron throne. There was no way back. He had to fight back. It was a roar of despair. Arthas took advantage of the opening that Wuther revealed due to his anger and slashed down. Who knew that it was a flaw that Wuther deliberately revealed? Frostmourne missed its target. Stupid disciple. Have you forgotten what it means to lure the enemy? His left hand grabbed Arthas' wrist, while his right hand held the holy light warhammer above Arthas' head. As long as Uther was willing. As long as Wuther was willing, this future Lich King would fall here forever. The soul that was destroyed by the holy light would no longer have the ability to inherit the Lich King's will and inheritance. At this moment, Arthas smiled evilly. Behind him, the corpse of Tyrrhenas, who had died a long time ago, suddenly pounced towards Wuthor. Looking at the rotting face of Tyrrhenas, there was still a familiar outline. As long as he used the holy light, he could destroy the zombified Tyrrhenas and get out of this predicament. However, Wuthor was stunned for a moment. When Wuthor reacted, he was shocked to find that he was already hugging Tyrrhena's corpse, and that evil magic sword had pierced through his body and his lord. "This is my victory, Arthas. My teacher." That was a sentence that plunged Wuthor into an abyss of darkness. Chapter 756. Uther the Lightbringer. Unlike his father, who was indifferent to his family, demanding everything from his son, and who had been on the throne for decades, in Arthas' heart, he was a perfect elder. Arthas could have a lot of dissatisfaction with his father, King Tyrrhenas. For example, he almost sold his sister Kalia for the land of Alterac. For example, he firmly held on to power and stubbornly refused all new things. For example. But for Uther, the only regret he had was that Uther did not support him during the orphanage incident. He could find 10,000 reasons to kill his father, but not one reason to kill Uther. He was honest, he was brave, he was universal, he was pious, and he taught Arthas everything he knew. Arthas had thought that after falling, he could easily raise his sword against Uther. However, when Frostmourne pierced through his father's ruined remains, pierced through Uther's armor, and stabbed the demonic sword into Uther's chest, Arthas realized that he could not accept the fact that he had killed Uther. Suddenly he cried. The undead had no tears. What squeezed out of his dry tear ducts was the power of darkness, as black as ink. The evil black power condensed into liquid and flowed on Arthas' chiseled face. Arthas knew that his face was scary. He also knew that he would be mocked by the Dreadlord later. He just could not help it. However, the initial pain only lasted for a short moment. What followed was the increase in power. Right. A deeper fall, a stronger evil. Frostmourne was cheering. The evil from the entire city of death was resonating with this demonic sword, gathering power on Arthas. The purer and more powerful power of darkness made every molecule in his soul rejoice in joy. Arthas kicked Uther, who had lost his strength and was starting to fall, and raised Frostmourne high up in the air as she screamed. Ah! Ah! Is this the sweetness of power? Ah! Is this the power that is enough to defeat Duke Marcus and sweep away everything in the world? The strong contrast made the pleasure in Arthas' heart more and more obvious and more intense. It was the thrill of turning into thousands of bubbles that could melt one's brain and soul. At this moment, the fallen prince suddenly heard a sneer. That was Uther. Poor child. Arthas lowered his head in astonishment. He expected to see anger, fear, panic, or even regret in the dying Uther's eyes. Who knew that all he saw was pity? That's right. It was a pity that would only be shown to the weak. This feeling completely destroyed Arthas' good mood. Here, smile. What? Is that so? Arthas didn't even need to look to know that her expression was going to be hideous. Looks like, I won't be able to complete your salvation. But you said, you can defeat Duque. I can't help but want to laugh. Blood began to gush out the moment the fallen prince pulled out the demonic sword. Wuthor was weakening at a speed visible to the naked eye. What? Arthas angrily grabbed the top of Wuthor's breastplate and dragged him up. There are many who are stronger than Duque, but none of them can defeat him. Orgrim can't. Mizul can't. Sargeras can't, and you can't. Whoosh. Ah. No. I am the strongest. No. Bastard, don't die so soon. Arthas was shocked to find that Wuthor had already breathed his last while laughing. Feeling that Frostmourne had imprisoned Wuthor's soul, Arthas decided to turn Wuthor into a death knight. Corrode. Fall. My master. In the eyes of the fallen prince, this should have been a very easy thing to do. Soon, Arthas' face showed shock again. Among the tens of thousands of souls that had been forcefully crushed by the demon sword, Arthas easily found the soul that only belonged to Wuthor, shining with golden light. However, no matter how he drove the demonic sword to corrode and drown Wuthor's soul, pouring in the wailing and fear of 1,000 people, 10,000 people, 100,000 people, Wuthor's holy soul still stubbornly refused him and the power of Frostmourne, resisting his and the Lich King's terrifying will. No, the prince screamed. He angrily killed all the living paladins in the palace, and then turned them all into death knights with thousands of times more magic power. These paladins had a strong holy faith when they were alive, but in the end, their souls were still contaminated. He was very sure that the power of the demonic sword had not weakened. But, no matter what he did, he could not make Wuthor's soul yield. The holy light had dissipated from Wuther's body, which had begun to turn cold. Of course, Arthas could turn Wuther's body into the dirtiest zombies or skeleton soldiers. But that was meaningless. A body without a soul could only become the lowest level of the undead. This could only prove that he still lost. Lost to Wuther's stubbornness. Lost to Wuther's will. Lost to Wuther's persistence. This strong sense of defeat accumulated in Arthas's chest. It made him feel like he was going crazy. For a moment, Arthas almost wanted to dismember Wuther's body to vent his anger. In the end, Arthas looked up to the sky and roared unwillingly. Summoning a disciple of the Church of the Damned, Arthas ordered, "Throw Wuther's body out. Throw it far away from Lordaeron City." This disciple carried out Arthas's order perfectly. When he returned to Caer Darrow's Scholomance Academy, he threw Wuther's body to the side of the road. After that, it was the famous tomb of Wuther. But at this moment, Arthas was venting the anger in his heart, until the two dreadlords stepped into the throne room with a sinister smile. "Although the result is not very good for you, you have completed the Lich King's task well." "Very good." Tichondrius laughed. His laughter made Arthas feel disgusted. "When are we going to attack the Dalagen again? Stand up where you fall." Arthas believed in this iron rule. The Dalagen? The Dalagen is no longer a problem. Accompanied by Tichondrius' laughter, the dreadlord's wings flapped continuously, adding a huge shadow to the room. Chapter 757. Almost at the same time, less than 50 kilometers away from the Nord Stream coast, a huge fleet was moving from west to east towards the Nord Stream harbor. The largest ship in the core of this mixed fleet was not the flagship, but the flag hanging on the largest ship was also very interesting. There were 3 flags in total. First of all, the flag representing nationality at the highest point was the blue lion flag of Stormwind with a golden edge. Then the flag representing the organization in the middle was the Stormwind flag of the Marcus Chamber of Commerce. Both of these were fine. What was interesting was the last flag representing an individual. That was the royal flag of Kul Tiras. This meant that the ship was a member of the Kul Tiras royal family. Generally speaking, according to international practice, a married princess was not allowed to continue to fly the royal flag of her family. There was only one reason for this strange phenomenon. Sitting on the ship was Princess Jaina Proudmoore, the fiancée of the Grand Duke of Stormwind, Duke Marcus. According to the previous agreement between the leaders of the two countries, Daelin and Lang, Jaina was already a member of the Duque family in life and a member of the Duque family in death. She no longer belonged to Kul Tiras. Therefore, Jaina's nationality was Stormwind. This was mainly because Daelin wanted Jaina to get out of here as soon as possible. Therefore, before Duque came back to complete the marriage, he kicked Jaina out first. In fact, in the 10 years since Duque disappeared, Kul Tiras military and merchant circles were really on guard against Jaina. Of course, Jaina was not Kalia. Or rather, with her outstanding talent and incomparable intelligence, she was not a woman who was willing to be ordinary from the beginning. On Jaina's 18th birthday, she did not use a copper coin from the Duque family and began to build a fleet under the framework of the Marcus Chamber of Commerce. Today, the huge fleet of 50 ships, including 5 battleships, was the result of her efforts. This was not an easy task. In the process of her rise, she did not receive any preferential treatment, whether it was from Kul Tiras, Stormwind, or the Marcus family, which in theory would be her backing. Even the schedule of the shipbuilding had to be arranged through her connections. She did not understand why Marcus's direct descendants would reject her so much. At first, Gianna thought that Miss Lucia Barov, who was probably her fiancé's secret lover, was trying to steal power from the Marcus family. Soon she found out that she was wrong. Marcus family structure was completely different from any other family or organization on the continent. It had an organizational structure that transcended this era. Even though Duque had disappeared, everyone in charge was still resolutely carrying out their duties. Lucia was in charge of the business side. She used her excellent economic acumen and her equally excellent father to provide the entire Marcus family with an astonishing wealth that rivaled the income of the entire Lordaeron treasury. Reginald Windsor firmly controlled the family's huge private army, giving them the strictest training and regular combat training with monsters as their opponents. On the surface, the Marcus family only had 30,000 soldiers. In fact, every single one of them who had returned to their hometown to serve as a militia in the past 10 years had strength not inferior to the elite soldiers of the Scarlet Cross Corps. As long as the Marcus family was willing, they could pull out 100,000 elites at any time. Edwin Van Cleef was a bit special. He came from the Mason Brotherhood and was in charge of construction and intelligence agencies at the same time. In the end, what tricks he left behind when building the castles, how much power he had in the dark, except for him, no one knew. Caesar Ulysses was in charge of the family's knights. This was a huge group of more than 1,000 people, including 300 holy knights. They were also in charge of protecting Gianna. Unfortunately, Gianna knew very well that they would not hesitate to carry out their duties, but never had the slightest bit of loyalty to her. Sylvanus and Lilith, the two sisters, were in charge of a mountain group of 5,000 people, a mix of elves and humans. The family's chief butler, Makarov, was unswervingly carrying out the policy left by Duque before he disappeared. He did many things that others could not understand. For example, tinkering with new technology that even the wisest dwarves and gnomes could not understand. Another example was storing up a lot of things for the family that even Antonidas, a master mage and alchemist, could not understand. Every year on the 31st of December, these important ministers of the family would gather together and report their work. Most of the time there was no specific content, and the report was only about the degree of completion, such as 94% or 122%. Makarov took out the schedule left behind by Duque and gave out grades and rewards for each person's work. All rewards or punishments were based on a book of rewards and punishments that would be moderately increased and reduced every year. It was even accurate enough to calculate what coefficients should be used for natural disasters such as droughts and floods. The annual gathering was not hidden from Gianna, but everyone just treated Gianna as an insignificant bystander. At first, Gianna tried to see if she could control this incomparably powerful family as a fiancée, but she soon gave up in despair. The entire family was a huge and sophisticated machine. Unless she had wisdom and foresight above Duque's, no one would obey her, an outsider, who had not yet officially changed her surname to Marcus. Gianna really wanted to cry but had no tears. She was tied to the Marcus family, but she could not get any substantial benefits as a mother. Of course, it was not that there were no benefits. For example, the 100,000 gold coins given to the fiancé every year, and the annual increase was 10%. Another example was the large number of magic books that Duque allowed Gianna to move to the Royal Magic Academy in Stormwind City before the battle with Nazul. Unfortunately, compared to the amazing treasure house of the Marcus family, these things were just pebbles on the roadside. The most terrible thing was that the plan that Duque set for this had a 20-year time limit. Unless it was confirmed that Duque was really dead, no changes were allowed within 20 years. Even if changes were to be made, it must be unanimously agreed by all the important ministers of the family. In order to meet the money needed for her magic experiments, in order to prove her ability, the bitter Gianna could only come out to do business. However, in the year she turned 20, Gianna's luck finally turned for the better. Her luck was the High Elves consultant cum butler standing beside her now. She claimed to be Magna Evans, but in fact she had an even more amazing name, Magna Aegwin. Yes, she was Mediva's mother, the previous guardian Aegwin. Duque is back, what should I do? Gianna asked Magna in a low voice. Actually, you can learn from me. If the Marcus family wants an heir, just help Duque give birth. I did the same to Neras back then, it's not like I'm the one raising him. Gianna almost spat out a mouthful of blood. Chapter 758. Mag continued, back then you were the one who killed me. The old bastards of the Tirisful Council forced me to abdicate every day. Today they were afraid that I would suddenly die, and tomorrow they were afraid that I would fall and join the Burning Legion. Alas, how could that be possible? Even if my brain was damaged, I would not let a demon sleep with me. I don't have such a heavy taste. Jaina was speechless. Actually, I think that Duque is already very good. He has this level at such a young age and he has a good brain. Alas, back then I had no choice but to choose the slightly more handsome Yelos Aaron. If it was 10 years ago when the Tirisful Council was still around and forced me, maybe I would have borrowed your Duque's seed. Jaina's face was full of embarrassment. I'm asking you how to define my relationship with Duque. Define? The Marcus family is so rich. Since they want an heir, you can give them one. Later on, you can extort as much as you can from them. Then you will have money, manpower, and resources to do what you want. Jaina had never been a woman who was willing to be ordinary. If she could obtain the support of the world's richest Marcus family, then it would definitely be of great help to her dream of creating a career on her own. But on the other hand, she did not want to rely on the Marcus family for everything. However, Duque had unparalleled influence in the entire alliance. Jaina was extremely conflicted. I don't think Duque loves me. Oh, you're afraid of the latest news that Duque controls the Scarlet Cross under the name of Kalia, right? Jaina did not comment, which was a tacit agreement. Duque suddenly returned, and then in less than a day after the news of Arthas' patricide spread, he immediately made Kalia Menethil the queen. At the same time he quickly incorporated the Scarlet Cross, and used the tribe near the Dalajan to destroy Arthas' army of 1,000,000 undead. This news really shocked Jaina to the point of dizziness. Duque's gorgeous command and the super big move of using the tribe to kill 1,000,000 undead army definitely proved that he was the real person. On the other hand, Jaina felt very uneasy. Duque had never acknowledged his engagement with her. Even when Lang Rin reached an agreement with her father back then, he said that he would first agree on behalf of Duque, but the specifics still depended on Duque himself. What if Duque came back and refused to admit it? What would she do then? Duque had quietly hidden Kalia for 13 years. Obviously, the important members of the Marcus family were aware of this. She and Gianna were the only ones who were blindfolded. Who knew if Duque was having an affair with Kalia? 13 years. Perhaps the child would already be 12 years old. No matter what, the Rotterdam kingdom would definitely fully support Kalia's marriage to Duque. What about her, Jaina, his so-called fiancée? Gianna's mind was in a whirl. At this moment, Magna was truly a god. She said in a frivolous tone, "It's very simple, seduce him." Seduction? Jaina's crystal-like eyes suddenly became lifeless. Men are all the same. Anyway, you have so much money. Magna naughtily glanced at Jaina's already very perky female mage breasts. Give me some props and I guarantee that Duque will come running over to be your subject. With that, Magna turned around elegantly. She displayed a set of things that would blind Jaina's dog eyes in her current high elf form. Yes, that's right. Under the translucent white chiffon gown was a set of pink, incomparably bold and decisive clothes. That's how I took care of Neras back then. Jaina held her forehead, speechless. I must have been blind to discuss this with Magna. Of course, Magna could be described as a tough woman without any explanation. But Jaina's situation was absolutely different from Magna Aegwyn's back then. Back then, Magna was forced into a corner, and had to step down from her position as guardian. Magna had the mentality that it was better to let her own son have it than to let Tom, Dick, or Harry have it. Now she was being asked to seduce Duque like a shameless prostitute? This wasn't just making things difficult for him. If he really succeeded, Jaina might actually consider it. What he was most afraid of was that after courting death he still failed. That would be terrible. As expected, Magna was a good magic teacher and a good housekeeper, but definitely not a good life counselor. Jaina didn't say anything. She raised her hand, and a mysterious ice elemental magic ball floated less than 3 centimeters above her palm. It rolled quietly, demonstrating the mysteries of the elements. Forget it. We'll talk about that later. Now, Arthas' scourge had destroyed Lordaeron. It would soon affect the entire Rotterdam and even the entire northern continent. Let's prioritize business first. Yes, that's right. Duque isn't going to like a woman who doesn't know her place and is making a scene at a time like this. Mag also became serious. Jaina sighed, but Arthas becoming a Death Knight has fulfilled Medivh's prophecy. Mediv. Speaking of Mediv, it was another amazing story. The arrogant Aegwyn had resurrected her son. Yes. Not the undead like the Scourge, but a true resurrection. This made the various kings feel unbearable, and they were extremely suspicious of Mediv. The two guardians, who were once extremely powerful, had now lost their earth-shattering power that was enough to destroy half of the world. Aegwyn was around the Radiant Moon standard now. After Jaina discovered her living in seclusion, she became Jaina's counselor. As for Mediv, after fulfilling his last warning duty, he truly went into seclusion to live out the rest of his life. Jaina was undoubtedly the one who believed in the prophecy the most. How could she not believe it when she was nagged by a powerhouse who had lived for almost 1,000 years? If the entire Eastern Kingdom really shows signs of destruction, what will you do? Mag asked. Jaina was silent for a long time before saying, I will first take a look at Duque. After all, Duque was the hero of the 2 battles at the Dark Portal. If there's anyone who can save the continent from such a terrifying scourge, it will definitely be Duque. If Duque can't do it, I will try to convince as many people to follow me across the endless sea to the Kalimdor continent on the other side of the sea to seek a new life. Have you found the place? Jaina's gaze seemed to transcend space, passing through the turbulent endless sea to reach the shore. I found it. It's called Theramore. Chapter 759. Duque received news that Kurtiras had gathered the Stormwind fleet to the North Stream coast, led by his rumored fiancée Jaina Proudmoore. Daylin was a little far this time, but he would arrive with the first and second fleets in about a week. Duque gritted his teeth when he heard the news. Jaina was a small matter, but he still had to focus on the battle at hand. The damned canopy of undead blocked most magical communication, which made it 80% more difficult for Duque to grasp the situation. That was not the most important thing. What was more important was that Antonidas had gone mad. Not only did he ask the Dalajan to look after his own fields, he actually used the Dalajan's losses as an excuse to refuse to provide enough food for the Scarlet Cross. A week's food is enough. Isn't that Rotterdam's territory? Let Rotterdam's army resupply themselves. Antonidas's words sounded sour. Mograine was furious when he heard that. He gritted his teeth and cursed, "Damn old man, you're not kind." In private, Mograine explained to Duque that this was due to the various conflicts between Rotterdam and the Dalajan during the 10 years that Duque had disappeared. Although the Dalajan was still in the alliance, the relationship between the two countries was already very bad. As the leaders of the two countries grew older, there were all sorts of stubborn old men. Abendis asked Duque, "Then do we just go there like this?" Actually, after so many years, the silver pine forest has regained its vitality. Although the trees are not very tall, they have at least grown back. If the Lord's rations are still fine, we can hold on for a year, let alone a month. Duque shook his head and refused. As a transmigrator, he knew better than anyone else what it meant to have rations before the troops moved. In the history of China, didn't the rations of the three countries also get burned, and Cao Cao turn the tables on them? It would take nearly a week to get to the North Stream coast from here. Including the food that the Dalajan had given them, it would only be enough for 2 weeks. If anything were to happen, the Scarlet Cross army would have to kneel. Although Kultira's fleet was on the other side, Duque's heart was still weighed down by a huge boulder. It was an ominous premonition that made him breathless. After hesitating for a while, Duque still made a decision. Even though the army was right next to the Dalajan, Duque had no choice but to go to the South Sea city-state to transfer food. Obviously this was a bad situation. 5 days after defeating Arthas's Scourge army, Duque's negotiations with the Dalajan still had not made any progress. Antonidas didn't want to see Duque, so he sent Kale, that's to see the stubborn old man. Antonidas even asked Kaisi to urge Duque to bring the people of the Rotterdam kingdom away. After all, the owner of the South Sea city-state was actually Alicia, so of course she would not stop Duque. Not only had food and armaments been replenished, but Duque had also received almost 10,000 soldiers. Moreover, the first batch of reinforcements from Stormwind City would arrive at the South Sea city-state in 3 days. Everything seemed to be on track except for the fact that the Dalajan were still not very cooperative. "We can't wait anymore. The latest news is that many refugees are flocking to the North Stream coast. There are more and more undead in the Tirisful Glades, and the troops there are not enough to resist the Scourge army," Mograine advised Duque. In the Tirisful Glades, there were only the private armies of a duke and 2 earls, which added up to a little more than 30,000 people. Moreover, their training was terrible. They usually fought wild beasts, occasionally encircled a small number of orcs and maintained law and order, but against the tide of zombies, even ghosts knew that they would not be able to hold out. Duque had once led an army to defeat the main force of the Scourge army. It was true, but the entire northern continent was filled with the cult of the damned, spreading plagues and constantly creating undead. Only the heavens knew when Arthas would bring out the next million-strong army. At this moment, Duque did something that everyone did not understand. He announced that as a mage and a Kirin Tor Parliament member, he would challenge the Kirin Tor Parliament's chairman Antonidas. For a moment, the world was in an uproar. The Dalajan was not a standard kingdom, because it was controlled by the Kirin Tor Parliament. Although the chairman exercised the authority of the king, he only had 2 votes in the parliament. In other words, if a policy was opposed by 4 members, then the chairman's decision could also be overruled. Interestingly, because the Dalajan had advocated the supremacy of the arcane for more than 2,000 years, all mages could join the Dalajan regardless of their status. Therefore, the Dalajan's Kirin Tor Parliament membership was almost open. As long as a person did not hold an official position in their original kingdom, they could join the Dalajan. This was why Kale, who was obviously Prince Kuel Salas, could become a Kirin Tor Parliament member because he did not hold an official position. Another requirement to become a Kirin Tor Parliament member was that one must be at least a Radiant Moon mage. Duque took advantage of this loophole. Because he had just returned to Azeroth, he did not have any official position in Stormwind. Although he was now the commander of the Alliance, the alliance was different from a kingdom. In the Dalajan's laws, it was not mentioned that the official positions in the alliance were included. After all, Antonidas himself had the position of a general in the alliance. Alright, the second loophole was that the Kirin Tor parliament would rather go without than have a shoddy candidate. In the past 3 years, due to the death of one of the old councillors in the Kirin Tor 6-member council, there were only 5 of them left in the Kirin Tor 6-member council: Antonidas, Crasus, Kale, That's, and 2 other councillors that Duke did not recognize. If Duque applied now, there was no need for an election. He would automatically become a Kirin Tor parliament member on the spot. I declare that my first motion as a Kirin Tor parliament member is, I want to initiate a duel for the arcane throne. I want to challenge Antonidas' position as the chairman. The chairman of the Kirin Tor parliament was elected once every 10 years and could be re-elected countless times. There were only 3 possibilities for a chairman to be replaced midway. The first was that the chairman was dead. The second was that all the members voted against the chairman. The third was that the members challenged the chairman to a duel. The result was that Antonidas had to accept the duel. Kale, That's was frantic when he heard this news. Duque, what are you doing? Although the Dalajan is not cooperating, you can't forcefully seize the power of the Dalajan, can you? Besides, you're only a radiant moon. No, even if you're about to advance, can you defeat a Breaking Dawn mage? This time, Antonidas could no longer sit still. The day after Duque publicly announced the duel, Antonidas appeared in the Violet Square in the heart of the Dalajan. Duque, why do you want to challenge me? Antonidas' hair and beard danced in the wind. The Breaking Dawn arcane spell rippled through the air. Duque's leisurely voice was amplified by magic. You're not willing to fight the Scourge army, nor are you willing to die. I'm very troubled. Chapter 760. Duque was already a legend. The legend of the previous generation. The legend of a poor boy who climbed to a high position on his own. It was also the legend of a mage reaching the peak. Countless mages of the new generation had an indescribable longing and expectation for Duque. Especially after Duque led the Scarlet Cross and lifted the siege of the Dalajan by the Scourge army, this longing and expectation reached its peak. To be honest, the Dalajan mages did not have much resistance to Duque's announcement of challenging the position of the chairman. After all, Antonidas had indeed aged over the years, and his extremely conservative policies were unpopular. Duque's challenge was a little sudden, but it was not unacceptable. But it should not have been this arrogant and even wanted Antonidas to die. Mograine and Abendis could not believe their ears. Kale, That's handsome face was full of shock and disbelief. What did Duque say just now? The arrogant words that even Terinas did not dare to say when Lordaeron was at its peak really came from Duque's mouth? Was Duque going to become a tyrant? Even Antonidas didn't know what to say. At this time, Duque, who was under everyone's gaze, shrugged and let out a breath. Alright, the joke ends here. I've simulated what would happen if a great demon occupied a high position in the alliance. Mograine and Abendis, Kale, That's and the other counselors, countless onlooking mages. Damn it! Duque, what are you trying to do? Are you trying to scare us to death by saying something like this? What the hell are you doing? The next moment, Duque's expression began to turn sorrowful. His voice became low, and he began to speak in an almost mournful voice. I have had a very magical ability since I was young. I never believed in the holy light, but I can clearly distinguish between good and evil. 15 years ago, when I was still a mere magic apprentice, I saw an unforgettable scene. Duque seemed to bring up something that had happened 15 years ago when he was still a magic apprentice. This made the hearts of the big shots of the alliance tense up. 15 years ago as a magic apprentice? Wouldn't that be? I was lucky enough to get the opportunity to join the Stormwind City Royal Magic Academy. At that time, the strongest magician in the world, His Excellency Mediv, publicly announced that he was willing to accept me as his disciple. I refused. Although I pretended to be young and vigorous at that time, the excuse I used was that I wanted to be greater than greatness, that I wanted to surpass Mediv. But do you know the real reason? No one knew why Duque refused. However, at that moment, everyone was thinking about the first battle that made Duque famous. The shocking battle with the Mediv who was possessed by the Demon King Sargeras and Karazhan. Everyone suddenly thought of something. Yes, they thought of it, but no one was sure. Everyone looked suspiciously at Antonidas, who was fine. Duque continued in a low voice, yes. Everyone guessed correctly. I have an extraordinary talent to see through the appearance of things. Back then, I could tell at a glance that Mediv had been possessed by a demon. However, back then I was just a magic apprentice and no one would believe my words. Now, Duque suddenly pointed at Antonidas, tears in his eyes. Now, in the name of the Alliance's commander, I order Mograine and Abendis to use exorcism to attack Antonidas. Exorcism was not an offensive spell for ordinary races, but for the undying and demons, it was a poison. Normally, mages and priests were notorious for not getting along. This was a battle of ideas. After all, one believed in the more materialistic arcana that could be explained by theory, while the other believed in the holy light, pure idealism. Thus, there were no churches of holy light in the Dalagen. The only priests were mostly battle priests that had been invited back. No one would be so bored as to use exorcism on a Breaking Dawn great wizard for no reason at all. But that was Duque's order. Mograine and Abendis led a group of holy knights and rushed over. As soon as they were in range, a large amount of holy light would be thrown at them. Time seemed to freeze. The faces of every Dalaran wizard were filled with utter stupefaction. They could not figure out if this was a power struggle or something else. Antonidas shouted, "Duke Marcus, what are you doing? You are using the Alliance's power to rudely interfere with the Dalagen's internal affairs. Do you think you can get away with this? Stand down or I will announce that the Dalagen officially leaves the Alliance." The muscles on Duque's face trembled and his tightly clenched fists shook. "Leave the Alliance. You have no right to do that, Balnazar the Dreadlord." Finally, as the last word left his mouth, Duque made his move. Dozens of mage hands suddenly appeared in the void, each of them holding a bottle of holy water used to exorcise evil spirits. The bottle opened, and the glittering holy light poured down on Antonidas's head. If he was still the Antonidas from before, nothing would have happened even if he was drenched. But he was not. Faced with the sea of holy light, he did not use any magic. Instead, he used his aged body to dodge the attack. Even the best thieves would have to admit that they were inferior to him. He leapt backwards and his entire body flew 20 meters away. Yes, that's right. Balnazar the Dreadlord. In the original history, he took the opportunity to occupy the body of Sidan Dathrahan when the humans attempted to reclaim Stratholme. He used the entire Scarlet Crusade as his tool and sacrificed countless fanatical warriors of the Scourge army. Because of Duque's appearance, history changed once again. Balnazar, who was supposed to attack Sidan, actually succeeded in ambushing the incomparably powerful Antonidas. If not for the system elf notifying Duque that the mark on Antonidas' head had changed to a hostile red, and that it was marked as undead, Duque would not have believed that Antonidas had been killed. Unfortunately, time could not be turned back. In order to prevent the hundreds of thousands of Dalagen citizens from being killed by Balnazar, Duque could only expose Balnazar in front of everyone. The next moment, Duque used Blink to appear in front of Balnazar and hit Antonidas' body with a magic staff enchanted with exorcism, knocking the Dreadlord out of Antonidas' body. What appeared before everyone's eyes was a huge, evil, and terrifying existence. Chapter 761. Gigantic bat wings spanning more than 8 meters, a 3-meter-tall body clad in armor, fingers as sharp as hooks, a human face that was as dry as a skeleton, and strange horns that stretched towards the sky. All these characteristics pointed to the fact that Balnazar was a Dreadlord. On the ground was Antonidas, who had collapsed. A Breaking Dawn archmage, an iconic figure who was hailed as the ultimate force after the Guardians ceased to exist, had actually been silently killed and replaced? Such a strong contrast caused all the Dalagen mages to lose their ability to speak. A shudder that came from the depths of their souls caused most of them to open their mouths wide in fear. They wanted to scream out of fear, but they could not even utter a single sound. Only the most clear-headed ones took action without hesitation. Mograine and Abendis' paladins were charging forward at full speed. Kale, that's roared angrily after regaining his senses, and a mysterious magical wave rose from his body. It was a mysterious spell that did not belong to any magic that Duque knew of. He did not know what it was, but it was clear that Balnazar's entire body was convulsing. No matter how hard he struggled, he could not move. Good job. Duque and Mograine shouted at the same time. With another flash, or if Mograine charged for another 3 seconds, they would be able to kill their way to the Dreadlord and let him have a taste of the fear of death. Right at this critical moment, a shocking change occurred once more. The 2 Kirin Tor counselors that Duque had never paid attention to had transformed. It was not accurate to say that they had transformed. They had revealed their true faces. They had cursed the followers of the Church. The system genie's scanning ability was amazing. It could detect any life form that was different from humans, and it could also sense the presence of hostility. Unfortunately, it could not scan the hearts of people. These were two counselors who had fallen into depravity and longed for immortality. But now they were still living people, radiant moon mages that could use normal magic. They had made Duque suffer the moment they made a move. This was an attack from a mage tower that possessed extremely high magical power. As the original masters of the Dalagen, they firmly controlled the most powerful mage tower in the Dalagen. An unimaginable arcane storm descended from the purple mage tower ball. Countless energy beams that resembled arcane missiles instantly intertwined like vines, firmly blocking the path between Duque's trio and the Dreadlord. If Duque had not mastered advanced spatial magic, which allowed him to reduce the distance of his blink at critical moments, even someone as powerful as Duque would have been killed in an instant. Gala the fat-eyed Kale, that was seething with anger. His golden hair fluttered in the wind due to his anger and the rich arcane fluctuations. Kale, that's looked like an angry golden lion. Ha! We humans don't have eternal lifespans like you elves. If you want to blame someone, blame that damn racial limit. Galatha was already 60 years old. According to the lifespan of humans in this era, that was almost the limit. It's useless even if you kill us. We've already offered our souls to His Majesty the Lich King. Fat-eyed was almost the same. They had used their entire lives to climb to the Radiant Moon rank. They were unwilling and unwilling. Thus, under their inflated ambitions they fell into the path of demons. On the other side, the Dreadlord Balnazar suddenly laughed maniacally. Not bad, not bad. Duke Marcus, you're truly a human hero. You actually discovered our trap in advance. But so what? Everything will end. Dark circles of light appeared on the marble tiles of the Dalagen Square. The entire square buzzed, as if indicating that something was about to break out of the ground. At first, the mages and apprentices near the square retreated in fear. However, apprentices were the most curious people in the world. Relying on the magic shield of the high-level mages, they actually stretched their necks to witness what was going to happen next with their own eyes. Idiots! Run out of the city. Rendezvous with the army. Duque's loud roar finally woke the bunch of idiots up. They finally began to shout and retreat. Of course, it would be more appropriate to describe it as running away. Countless circles of light appeared behind the Dreadlord. Liches floating in the air stepped out of the teleportation gates, followed by gargoyles flying in from the distance. There were also cave demons rushing out of the teleportation gates on the ground, as well as zombies and skeleton soldiers surging out of the various cellars of the Dalagen. The huge tiles were overturned, and huge dragon skeletons began to climb out of the ground. They roared soundlessly. First, it was the dragon hets. However, the ground of the Dalagen was a little too sturdy, and it looked like it took a lot of effort for them to climb out. Duque's face instantly turned pale. He had been so focused on reminding Syndagosa of Maligos that he actually forgot that there were hundreds of dragon corpses in the Dalagen as well. This was done by him and Antonidas in the shattered ridge of the Alterac Kingdom back then. It was obvious that the Dalagen had paid a huge price to move the dragon corpses and dragon skins into the underground warehouses of the Dalagen. F***CK. This time even Duque could not help but curse. Duque could totally imagine that it wouldn't be long before the sky of the Dalagen would be occupied by those damned bone dragons. At that moment, the Dalagen would understand what it meant to cover the sky. There were screams everywhere and panic was spreading everywhere. If they continued to stay here and fight against the Calamity Army, they would be courting death. Not to mention Kale, that's brought even worse news to Duque. Duque. Not good. Tirani's remains are in the warehouse beneath the Dalagen city. Hundreds of thousands of alpacas ran through Duque's mind. Damn, Tirani's was also an ancient dragon. If he was turned into a bone dragon, he would definitely be a terrifying existence on the same level as Syndagosa. There were so many monsters, how could he fight them? Duque immediately made a decision. Retreat. Duque's shouts rang out in all directions. Ah, do you think you can still leave? Leave your lives here and obediently become the slaves of His Majesty the Lich King. The two fallen Kirin Tor counselors laughed. Duque's gaze sharpened as he said coldly, "Idiots! Don't compare me to trash like you radiant moons." Countless magic circles suddenly appeared in the space around Duque. Those were thousands of passageways connected to the elemental realm. Impossible. Fear gripped the hearts of the two counselors. Chapter 762. The Wizard Tower was supposed to be the protector of the wizard apprentices. Just as the Wizard Tower, which contained all kinds of elemental energy, was about to attack the wizards, Duque suddenly opened up countless elemental passages. This should have been impossible. Those who played magic would naturally not want others to use magic to attack them. In the capital of magic, the Dalagen, the passages to the most powerful elemental realm were all controlled by all kinds of magic formations, restrictions, and seals. It was possible to cast magic of the Morning Star level or below, but every high-grade magic had to be approved by a higher-level controller. This meant that unless one was playing with elemental magic that was not familiar to the world, what magic one used and how high the level of magic one could use would all depend on the Kirin Tor Parliament. In the eyes of the two counselors, Duque was an outsider, and it was impossible for him to use high-grade magic here. Obviously, Duque had subverted their imaginations. Impossible? The corner of Duque's mouth curled up into a cold smile. Did you really think that after staying in the void for 10 years, I did nothing but work as a secretary every day? Ahem, although developing the Windrunner sisters was a fact, I really did train. The biggest result of training was that I crammed a large amount of magic knowledge, and also maximized the usefulness of the system elf. It was only at this moment that the two counselors noticed that the corpse of Antonidas on the ground had been grabbed by the collar by Duque. Suddenly, an electric current shot out from Duque's body. In the sky that was once again covered by the canopy of necromancy, this lightning zigzagged out, breaking through the dark clouds that were boiling like porridge, and then spread out like an umbrella, shooting into the wizard towers of all sizes. Suddenly, a red dot like a laser appeared between Duque's eyebrows. As the red dot shook intensely, it was like a boulder falling into water, creating a circle of mysterious ripples in the void that could not be explained by the theory of arcane spells. The circle of mysterious power spread out to a radius of 3 to 4 kilometers. Kale, that's watched this scene unfold in shock. He did not know what Duque had done. In the blink of an eye, he was still struggling to activate his own mage tower to fight against the other mage towers controlled by the Scourge army. Elemental missiles rained down on each other in a frenzy. His mage tower had the support of Kuel Salus, so it was naturally of a higher grade than other mage towers. However, the size of a mage tower was strictly regulated in the Dalagen. No matter how big Kale, that's wizard tower was, it could not compare to a Breaking Dawn wizard's wizard tower. His wizard tower was already at a disadvantage. After all, there were many bastards who had sided with the Calamity army. 2 Radiant Moons and 28 Morning Star wizard towers of various sizes had attacked his lair. Kaizi was still thinking that if Antonida's wizard tower attacked him, he would have to kneel. Who knew that in the blink of an eye, the situation would be reversed. Standing at the center of the Dalagen city, the largest and most magnificent 7-story mage tower finally shone with a dazzling ice-blue radiance. Not good. Half a second ago, Balnazar, who had been grinning maliciously as the mastermind behind Dalaran's destruction and watched as tens of thousands of mage apprentices fled for their lives, was so frightened that his face turned as white as a sheet of paper. Having possessed Antonida's body not too long ago, he knew better than anyone how difficult it was to deal with Antonida's defensive magic system. After the ambush had succeeded, Antonida's soul had been taken away and offered to Arthas. Now all that was left was the old man's body. Even he, the possessor, would not be able to control Antonida's wizard tower with this body alone. Now that the wizard tower was glowing, it naturally had nothing to do with him. The white light that gathered on the Breaking Dawn wizard tower grew stronger and stronger. It was a huge hexagonal ice flower that was a kilometer in diameter. Relying on the surging mana stored in the wizard tower, it floated in the air in a translucent form. The liches on the Calamity army side finally noticed the abnormality above their heads. Be it them or the low-ranked Undyings, they all raised their heads stiffly and watched as the huge illusory ice flower turned into countless dazzling ice arrows that rained down on them. Countless rays of white light extended from the edges of the hexagonal ice crystal like a giant tree falling from the sky. In an instant, countless undead monsters were completely penetrated, and the weaker monsters were directly annihilated. The stronger ones were like the nails used to fix the monsters in place during dissection, firmly nailing them to the ground. Kale, that saw with his own eyes a few cave demons that were larger than carriages being nailed to death. No matter how their bodies twisted and convulsed, they were unable to break free. It was not just Antonida's wizard tower. All the other wizard towers, regardless of whether they had a master or not, as long as they were below the Radiant Moon rank, were forcefully controlled by Duque. The result was that apart from the 2 Radiant Moon archmages from the Church of the Damned, all the other wizard towers unleashed overwhelming firepower at the Calamity army. It looked more like a trap set by Duque than the Calamity army. Next, the ice crystals in the sky suddenly split apart, turning into 6 incomparably large ice blades that dealt a fatal blow to Balnazar. Usually he would not dare to take a direct attack from a Breaking Dawn wizard head-on, let alone with the support of the wizard tower. Balnazar twisted his body and raised all the shields he could, not even hesitating to use the low-ranked Undyings as meat shields. However, he was still unable to dodge the 6 consecutive ice blades controlled by Duque. Duque had long since calculated all the dodging routes of the Dreadlord, and easily allowed Antonida's wizard tower to unleash its ultimate attack on the Dreadlord's vitals. Balnazar immediately let out a mournful howl. In the next moment, the sound of wind erupted from his body, and many holes suddenly burst out on his huge body. Not a single drop of blood flowed out of the holes, and instead, a whistling cold wind sprayed out. Very soon, the Dreadlord's body became bright and white. No, it was already translucent. Go to hell. Duque roared and clenched his fists. Balnazar's body immediately began to crumble. This was a saturated attack from the ice elements that far exceeded what his body and soul could endure. Not only did the massive amount of elemental power frantically destroy his body, it even tore at his soul. In the final moments of his life, his body emitted a dazzling white radiance, and then collapsed with a loud bang, turning into countless elemental fragments that were finer than dust, dissipating in the wind. Dreadlord Balnazar had died in battle. At this moment, not a single disciple of the Church of the Damned dared to believe their eyes, and not a single lich dared to challenge Duque. This was the first time in history that someone had destroyed a Dreadlord's soul for eternity. Chapter 763. Good job, Cale, that shouted with all his might. This prince, who had been the crown prince for over 1,000 years, was rarely excited. But he did not expect Duque to carry Antonida's corpse and say to him, "Retreat. I'll give you 5 minutes. Take the most precious thing in your wizard tower and retreat." Kaizi was stunned. Didn't we have the upper hand? Duque rolled his eyes. Upper hand? Did I do too well giving you the illusion that we had the upper hand? The Dalajan is finished. Didn't you obtain Antonida's authority? Duque smiled bitterly. If he really is dead, Duque gritted his teeth. What I'm most afraid of is that he'll die and come back to life. Sometimes Duque wanted to slap himself in the face. The good didn't work, but the bad did. Almost as soon as he finished speaking, Antonida's corpse, in his hand, suddenly mutated. It was a violent wave of darkness that completely surpassed that of a radiant moon mage. Instinctively, Cale, that stabbed with a dagger wrapped in flames. Unfortunately, it was completely useless. Whether it was the physical attack of the dagger itself or the fire element lingering on the dagger, they were all repelled at the same time. Duque and Kaizi's faces instantly turned pale. Low-level mysteries were destined to be rejected and dissolved by higher-level mysteries. This phenomenon could only mean one thing: Antonida's soul was coming back, and in the form of a fallen one. Go. Without hesitation, Duque and Cale, that's immediately used long-distance flash to leave. What kind of joke was this? A Breaking Dawn mage had fallen? This was earth-shattering news that was no less than Arthas' fall. Duque gritted his teeth so hard that they almost broke. What was going on? Didn't Arthas let Antonida's soul go after conquering the Dalajan? He let the soul of the former super-powerful pharaoh wander the ruins of the Dalajan as a wandering ghost. Until this moment, Duque did not know that Antonida's fall was actually his fault. It was precisely because of his appearance that the first time was in Lordaeron City, and the second time was in the Battle of the Dalajan, where he had ruthlessly thwarted Arthas' offensive. This caused Arthas to suffer greatly. Then, because Uther's soul forcefully rejected the corrosion of Frostmourne, and refused to fall no matter what, this made Arthas angry. When he had no helpers, the Dreadlords happened to deliver Antonida's soul. At this moment, in the northern part of the Dalajan, the surface of Lake Lordamir was strangely cold in summer. No one would have thought that just inserting Frostmourne into the lake on a hot summer day would freeze the lake with a radius of over 100 kilometers. Arthas leaned on his sword and looked coldly at Dalaran, who had fallen into chaos as the magical radiance continued to shine. Not enough. Not enough. This was far from enough. What the Lich King wanted was even greater destruction. Even more death. Arthas' voice was dignified. Do you understand? My new servant. Understood. The one who replied was an incomparably powerful soul. His soul was so focused that if one did not look closely, they would not be able to tell that he was actually a soul without a physical body. A soul chain as thick as a thumb extended from Arthas' hand and disappeared less than half a meter away. Surprisingly, the other half of the chain was connected to the neck of the soul wearing a luxurious mage robe. That powerful soul was naturally Antonida's soul. Even though he did not have a physical body, Antonida subconsciously swallowed his saliva. His soul was filled with bitterness. The old mage could not help but recall the scene not long ago. His gray lips twitched. The Dreadlord was indeed the most treacherous and terrifying creature in the universe. Originally, because he was stronger, he had chased after the Dreadlord that he had injured with one blow. Unfortunately, most of the Dreadlords were award-winning actors. By the time he left the main battlefield, there were already 4 Dreadlords working together to seal off the surrounding space. Then as many as 18 different debuffs were applied to him. Then he knelt down. His soul was extracted while he was still alive. Then, as if by magic, a Dreadlord turned small and entered his body, taking over his body. When he came back to his senses, he saw Uther's cold corpse and Arthas, who had just finished killing his master. Antonidas tensed his spirit. In his soul state, his hairs and beard stood up in anger on his blurry face. "I won't give in, you heartless degenerate. Executioner. You even dared to kill your father and master, what else do you not dare to do? I will not yield. No matter how you torture me, I will not yield. Destroying me is the only thing you can do." What Antonidas didn't know was that Arthas had just suffered another major setback in her attempt to corrupt Uther's soul. The grayish-white lips of the former prince twitched. Then, the prince revealed a hideous and twisted expression that did not match his handsome face. "As you wish, self-proclaimed righteous mage. I just don't know if your soul is as pure as my teacher's, and if your will is as tenacious as his?" The prince even walked over and waved his sword. Instantly, Antonida's ears rang with the pained cries of countless souls. Ah! Those were the cries of despair of millions of women before they died. No! Those were the cries of a man who could not protect his wife and children before he died. "Mama, Mama!" Those were the heart-wrenching cries of a child who had yet to grow up in the most terrifying moment. Antonidas let out a sob. He couldn't tell if he was crying out of fear or if he was crying out of regret. But he knew very well that this short, hoarse sob had nothing to do with anger, hatred, or justice. Among the 7 nations of the Alliance, the Dalajan had the least concept of so-called evil. In more than 2,000 years of history, countless mages had tried forbidden magic experiments. That was why the Tirisful Assembly later came into being. It regulated the scope of magic that mages could use and stop those experiments. But deep down, every mage did not have a clear concept of so-called morality. Antonidas's soul, which was imprisoned by Tichondrius, faced the phantom of the blade of Frostmourne. He had no room to resist. The resistance he imagined did not exist at all. The phantom of the rune sword pierced through him. Cold. It was so cold as if he still had the body of a living person. A bone-chilling sword pierced through his old body and broke open his thin chest. No. Chapter 764. Antonidas's soul was pierced by the Frostmourne, like a piece of barbecue meat pierced by a barbecue fork. When Arthas retracted the sword, the old mage's soul followed it. The old mage was about to scream in fear, but he suddenly wondered if he was hallucinating. On Arthas's still handsome face, the old mage seemed to have a trace of remorse in addition to endless anger. Arthas withdrew the sword, as if shaking off the blood stains on the sword, and flung the old mage's soul that was originally pierced out of the sword. The old mage's soul could not go anywhere. He curled up on the floor like a living thing. The cold feeling from the depths of his soul made every molecule of his soul tremble. The indescribable pain seemed to tear his soul into pieces. He subconsciously stretched out his soul-shaped arm to cover the wound on his chest, as if blood was coming out of his chest, as if his palm could give his heart warmth. "Destroy me." Antonidas was almost begging and said weakly, "I pray for a quick destruction." Antonidas's senses began to dull, and even his voice became indiscernible. Arthas's voice suddenly came. "Based on what you have done, it is not that I cannot give you a peaceful rest." This gave Antonidas hope. In the next second, Arthas personally extinguished this hope. "Unfortunately, if you want to blame someone, blame Duke Marcus for ruining my and the Lich King's plan, and then Uther for refusing the embrace of darkness. I can't bear a third failure." Fear turned into countless sharp nails that pierced into his soul, but this feeling only lasted for a moment, and soon dissipated as everything around him became blurry. "Will Arthas resurrect me? Turn me into a shambling and inferior zombie?" "No," he murmured, his voice full of resentment and indignation seemed to come from the distant mountains. "I am Antonidas, an existence that could have been the world's greatest mage. How could you turn me? Before he finished, Antonidas lost all senses. He thought that this would be an eternal slumber, where all the pain would disappear, leaving only the soft darkness and endless comfort and tranquility. He thought that there would be no more open or covert struggles between the Parliament and the Alliance, and that he could finally put down the heavy burden of being the leader of the Dalajan and rest forever. Unfortunately, the sudden pain pierced through his soul. This was not pain that came from his five senses, but an excruciating pain that he had never experienced before. He had once failed in an experiment and burned half of his body. He had once had his arms smashed by an ogre during an adventure. No physical pain he had ever experienced could compare to this torment. Antonidas suddenly realized that this was the torture of the soul. It was impossible for him, who had been captured by the runic sword, Frostmourne, to have a warm and peaceful death. The power of the demon sword was so violent that it tortured the souls of 100 people in one breath. The unbearable pain caused an impulse to surge up from the deepest part of his soul. This impulse went straight through his entire soul. The pain in the depths of his heart could not be vented, and the intense pain could not find any way to escape. This high-intensity torture easily broke through his will. Almost at the same time, in the shallow layer of Antonidas' soul, there was a tempting demonic voice that was slowly guiding him. Do you desire eternal life? Do you not have as much energy as before? Do you hate your aging body? Do you feel that you cannot let go of your power? Do you think that human life is not enough to explore the endless mysteries of magic? The 5 questions played in a loop. Antonidas wanted to resist, but he could not help but sink into it. He wanted to say no. But every time he was about to say it, his heart would tell him that he was lying. He rejected it 1,000 times, but the demonic voice asked him 10,000 times. The more he resisted answering, the more sorrowful he felt in his heart. Not only did it increase his pain, but it also made the voice sound even more blood-curdling. He did not know how many times it repeated, but finally, yes. I'm a coward. I hate myself for being weak. Fine. You win, I surrender. Along with the humiliating declaration, the defense in his heart finally collapsed like a dam. The dark and cold tide drowned his heart and quickly changed his soul. After a long time, the darkness dispersed from his senses, but everything in front of him did not return to color. Antonidas did not need to rely on the 7 colors of red, yellow, and blue to recognize the guy who tortured him, because even in the colorful world, he was only made of black, white, and gray. The rune magic sword, Frostmourne, that had devoured his soul was still shining brightly. Arthas raised his other hand and made a summoning gesture. This was how he pulled him out of the terrifying world that was sealed by the magic sword. Demonic spirit, before you return to your own skeleton you will be like this. When you return to your own body, you will become a powerful lich, Arthas told Antonidas in a tone of judgment. Lich? I actually became a lich? Antonidas felt a wave of humiliation but also a kind of pleasure. Arthas continued, although I do not want to admit it, I found that I do need a few loyal commanders to help me control the growing Scourge army. Now you, the once revered great sorcerer, will serve me. Antonidas felt an indescribable fear. No, I refuse. My magic will not pour out on my people, and every mystic who yearns for the mysteries of magic. Although his voice had become hollow and grotesque, Antonidas tried to make his voice sound dignified. Is that so? The evil prince made a gesture. It was just a slight movement of his fingers, but this extremely subtle movement caused him to shrink his entire soul due to the sharp pain. With unbearable pain, the old mage finally realized how powerless he was in front of the most powerful Death Knight. He finally realized that he had become the devil's tool, just a little more advanced than those rotting corpses and stinking ghouls. A few days later he followed Arthas back to the Dalajan, a place he was very familiar with. Then he sensed his own body. Go, let me use your mages. The fallen prince said arrogantly. Antonidas let out a shrill scream and rushed to his own body. On this day an extremely powerful lich was born. Chapter 765. Thousands of meters away, Duque and Antonidas could already see each other. They both felt bad. Duque's heart was filled with sighs. Even though he knew that Antonidas would fall, he had never thought that a Breaking Dawn mage who had fought for the Alliance for more than a decade and was hailed as the top combat power would end up like this. Duque did not know if he would end up worse than Antonidas if he really fell to Frostmourne. Of course, it was very likely that he would, because he did not believe in his own moral principles. It was ironic that the most immoral person was the most determined warrior, unwaveringly leading the alliance to fight against evil. Thinking about it made him chuckle. However, as a man who could move the entire world, the smartest way for Duque was to not let himself fall into that kind of tragedy. As for Antonidas, he saw Duque use the magic circuit in his body to control the Dalajan's mage tower and stop the Scourge army's attack, becoming the savior of the world once again. For some reason, hatred seemed to grow in his illusory soul shell as if it had a life of its own. He activated the secret door left in his lifeless body. Like a child pouncing on a brand new toy, he rushed over impatiently. He knew that no matter how far away he was from Arthas, there was an invisible chain that chained him to the hands of the fallen prince like a dog. He was powerless to change his fate. At this moment he started to hear whispers. "Kill Duque and let him serve my glory like you, Antonidas. You will work for death together, and you will both desire to obey and be enslaved. Arthas is my first and most beloved Death Knight. He will forever command all of you and all of you will feel honored." Frostmourne was tempting Antonidas, wanting to kill Duke Marcus, who was in the midst of a hero. It wanted to pull that great hero of the Alliance into the same situation as him. Yes, if the commander of the Alliance became a lich, it would definitely be a huge blow to the entire Alliance. Antonidas' face started to show a cold and hollow laugh. "Yes, as long as I return to my body, I'll become a peak-breaking Dawn Great Lich." Evil whispers were the most terrifying brainwashing in the world. This was not a simple hypnosis, but a kind of gradual inducement, constantly exerting influence on the soul until the victim took the imposed will as his own. Antonidas' soul flew over. In an instant he entered the body that he was extremely familiar with. Such a familiar feeling. This was the feeling of a mortal body. For a moment, Antonidas almost thought that he could be resurrected. Unfortunately, this was a beautiful and cruel illusion. His soul was no longer that of a human. Arthas had cut off his path of retreat from the very beginning. After being transformed by Frostmourne, it was impossible for his soul to return to the past. Demon spirit then lich. Not bad. "That bastard Balnazar didn't do anything to my body," Antonidas cursed. "Balnazar didn't even alter the old mage's body or leave any traces of evil on it in order to hide it perfectly. Even though it was to carry out a bigger scheme, it had undoubtedly benefited Antonidas. If his remains were destroyed, even if he became a lich, his strength would be greatly reduced. The moment he returned to his body, the signs of a living person on the surface of the old mage's body rapidly faded. His already dark yellow skin shriveled at a speed visible to the naked eye, and his white hair became incredibly dull. Due to the shrinking of his skin and muscles, his eyeballs looked like they were about to pop out of their sockets. Opening his eyes was actually opening his spirit sense. Antonidas saw his palms that were no different from a zombie's, and he couldn't help but feel sorrow. No, first, it was a roar of denial followed by endless jealousy in his heart. How can I be the only fallen one? Only Duque. I can't let Duque go. However, a situation that Antonidas had not expected happened. His repeated murmurs, which were like a curse, were suddenly like a goose that had its neck grabbed, unable to make a sound. If he could still sweat at this moment, Antonidas would definitely be drenched in sweat. Beside the Dalajan city, Duque and Kale, that's met up again. Kale, that's had obviously returned to his mage tower. He looked at the scene and was a little puzzled. Antonidas, that lich didn't catch up? And the authority? In his field of vision, the mage tower's authority had not completely fallen. The hundreds of mage towers in the Dalajan city were clearly firing at each other. Countless elemental lights intersected in the air and then bombarded each other's towers. If not for the fact that this was a battle to the death, it would be even more spectacular than a fireworks show. The powerful mana shock had destroyed half of the city in just a moment. Almost all the streets were burned in the flames. There was no destruction like in other cities. Instead, because of the exaggerated turbulence of energy, the collapsed buildings were more like some kind of magical and evil work of art. One of the mage towers exploded. It was originally destroyed by fire elements, but during the explosion, it caused a gap in the world of ice elements to collapse. A huge amount of ice elements sputtered out and froze all the scattered bricks in the air. Even the mage apprentices who were seeking refuge near the mage tower and the undead army who were slaughtering were completely frozen. The originally solid tiles on the streets were like waves formed by pixels, arching up layer by layer and falling down layer by layer. The entire Dalajan city seemed to be experiencing a never-ending earthquake. However, thanks to Duke's temporary control over the mage towers and the clear arrows on each mage tower, more than half of the mages and mage apprentices managed to escape to the west of the city. More than half of the mages and mage apprentices managed to escape to the west of the city. Outside the city was an army of 100,000 that was ready for battle. Seeing Duke and Kale, that's come out, Mograine, who had returned to command the army a step earlier, heaved a sigh of relief. Cover each other, retreat. Our target, Silver Pine Forest. At the start, the army with the Scarlet Cross as the core was still very nervous. Several huge phalanxes faced the Dalajan city, taking turns to retreat in an orderly manner. As the supply troops had already set off, most of the remaining soldiers were warriors, as well as the hesitant Dalajan spellcasters and guards. Kale, that's raised his Dalajan councilman flag further south of the army. This flag was like a magnet, quickly attracting the people of Dalaran who were fleeing in a panic. Chapter 766. Countless undead rushed up from the shores of Lake Lord Emir. However, before they could successfully break through the Scarlet Cross strict phalanx, they were stopped by endless traps. At the very front was a large pile of rakes, similar to what Duke Pigsy used before he transmigrated. They were simple rakes with bottles of holy water tied to the end of their long handles. As long as an undead stepped into the trap, 1 or 2 bottles of low-grade holy water would be thrown out. For humans it was no problem at all. For the undead, it was the most terrifying sulfuric acid. Then there was the trigger-type flame trap which looked like a blower. As long as an undead stepped on it, it would immediately spit out a ball of flames. Finally, there was fire oil mixed with divine power, which was fired directly from the catapults through ceramic oil tanks. Regardless of whether there was a canopy of undead in the sky, the moment the oil in the tanks came into contact with a spark, it would immediately spread towards the Calamity army. At this time of year, the summer wind blew from the west to the east in the Dalajan. Unless Arthas had the ability to suck away all the oxygen or change the direction of the wind, no matter how many undead came, they would all be burned. Not to mention the FFF regiment's flamethrower team that was standing in front of the formation, ready for battle. After 10 years of improvement, the flamethrower team, which originally required vehicles to carry fuel, had become Duke's ideal 2 types of soldiers. The first was portable. The soldiers carried the oil tanks on their backs and spat out flames using human hands and hydraulic pressure. Although the range of the flames was not long, the individual flamethrower had been successfully developed. The second was a steam-powered flamethrower tank. It was also powered by human hands and hydraulic pressure, but because of the vehicle, it could move on its own and spit flames up to 50 meters away. These 2 types of flamethrower were definitely the Calamity Army's greatest nemesis. Duke was very ruthless. The oil he used had been blessed by the priests and refined by the holy light. Because oil could float to the surface. To extinguish the fire, sand could only be used and not ordinary sand. It had to be sand that had been soaked in dark power. On the other side, looking at the frozen lake, Mograine was very worried. Duke, if Arthas uses her magic sword to freeze our army, Duke waved his hand. If a demon sword can freeze the entire city, then we should just hang ourselves and join the Doomsday army. Not to mention Mograine, even Abendis was stunned. This? Duke narrowed his eyes. I have a speculation. The demon sword Frostmourne is indeed an unimaginably powerful demon weapon, but it's definitely not invincible. Mograine asked, you know the source of Frostmourne's power? It's nothing more than souls in pain and despair. In order to exert power that transcends the mortal world, Frostmourne needs to absorb at least 1 million souls, but I can see that Frostmourne's condition isn't good. What Duke saw was naturally the result of the System Elf scan. Due to the distance, it was only a very rough scan. In the end, the power of Frostmourne was not as good as it was during the First Dalajan War. Duke did not know that Arthas had fought with Uther. He speculated that Frostmourne had used a large amount of dark energy to heal Arthas's injuries. Now Duke did not even use his mages. Just the flamethrowers alone were enough to stop the Doomsday army. This made Arthas very angry. Not to mention, many of the mage towers that had been used to surround and kill the Dalajan were still under Duke's control. The bombardment between the mage towers sputtered immeasurable elemental power. These chaotic and violent elements caused a terrible storm in the entire Dalajan city. Everything in the city was blown to pieces. The ordinary houses that had lost their magic protection were like building blocks that had been smashed by a heavy hammer. The loose walls and roofs disintegrated like countless pieces of paper, flying in the energy storm. A moment ago there might have been some mages or apprentices struggling at death's door, but now, all that was left were dead. The ordinary dead or the incomplete undying. As long as any mage tower could not withstand the enemy's attack, it would immediately explode, and then the flames of destruction would continue to spread forward. The bone dragons that had been trying to climb out of the ground were useless. Before they regained their freedom, there were a few loud explosions and immediately broken bones flew everywhere. The mage tower that could not withstand the attack of the enemy mage tower would explode. The mage tower that was about to be controlled by Antonidas would also explode. Once the mage tower that contained amazing magic exploded, the earth would shake and the mountains would shake, creating a super large pit with a radius of more than 100 meters. Within the range of the explosion, everything was naturally turned into ashes. Even the bone dragons could not withstand the violent energy. A little further away, the flying stones fell like hailstones on the heads of the surrounding undying. If they still had life or felt pain, they would definitely be screaming and crying. Arthas, who could not bear it any longer, directly gave the Great Lich a soul punishment through the spiritual connection. Antonidas, what the hell are you doing? The sharp pain caused Antonidas' withered body to shrink into a ball. Forgive me, my commander. Duke Marcus is too despicable. With a speed beyond the imagination of all the mages, he cracked the magic keys of more than half of the Dalajan mage towers and then reset the keys. When we tried to regain control of the mage towers, he had already rewritten the keys and set a trap. As soon as we tried to crack the keys by force, he would make the mage towers explode. Not to mention that Duque had nothing to do with the Dalajan. Rather than letting the Calamity army take advantage of it, it was better to use it as a bomb. After listening to Antonidas' long-winded explanation, Arthas finally understood that the magic key of each mage tower was supposed to be unique. Although as the president he could coordinate the firepower of the mage towers so that the whole city could work together, the coordination itself had to be approved by the owner of the mage tower. The problem was that, for some reason, Duque had actually used the president's authority to coordinate the various mage towers to directly crack the magic keys of nearly 70% of the mage towers during the short period of time he had Antonidas' body. Normally, cracking the keys was not impossible. Generally speaking, it only happened during the exploration of ruins and other events. Moreover, the cracking of every magic key basically took days, or weeks, as the unit of measurement. Who would have thought that Duque had such a heaven-defying thing as the system genie? Just by knowing the date of birth, hobbies, and so on, he could directly input it into the system and let the system use the high-speed exhaustive method to continuously test the password. You're tuning in to the Han Lee's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.